Hello, everyone. This is the RF Factor Podcast, episode 8, with Pete Gagliardi and me, Ray Gadetti. So, Pete, how
Yes,
you
sir.
doing? How
Good,
are you?
Ray. How you doing?
Good.
And welcome back, everyone, to the RF Factor Podcast, where we tease out the stories of how command courage can positively impact change. You know, the primary aim of the RF Factor is to ferret out key leadership principles from the experiences of our guests. The RF Factor stands for Relentless Follow-Up, and we chose that title because the most difficult component for leaders to sustain is relentless follow-up. You know, and it involves those frequent glances into your rearview mirror to see that the organization's mission, their policies and programs are still standing back there as intended and able to produce and sustain the outcomes that were originally anticipated.
Well, hey, thank you, Pete. So, folks, today we're joined by Ron Brooks. He's the founding member of Brooks Bawden Moore. It's a government relations and business strategy consulting firm. It's based in Washington, D.C. But check this out. Prior to founding Brooks, Bawden, and Moore, Ron served 38 years in law enforcement. He touched the executive level, the frontline management, investigative, homeland security, criminal intelligence. He touched all those bases. Now, he served first with the San Mateo, California Sheriff's Office, rising to the level of captain. But where I best know Ron is, and this is incredible, serving as a director over two entities. One, Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, the NCRIC, and at the same time, the director of the Northern California HIDTA. That's incredibly impressive to do that. And big shout out not only to you, Ron, but also your team for being in the wings to support you on those roles. Now, look, Ron is a national figure. If you don't know Ron, which I'm surprised if you don't, you will know him after today. He has a storied legacy in law enforcement, in narcotics enforcement, homeland security, and criminal intelligence. Now, Ron's background is probably one of the most impressive that I've seen in government, and includes being appointed to several national level committees. Now, there's probably just too many for us to talk about now because we want to keep this under an hour, but I will place them in the show notes because they are worth recognizing and seeing. Ron, again, he's not only a legacy in law enforcement, public safety, homeland security, but he's a model for folks to emulate. Now, besides being a good friend, I selected Ron to be on this cast because I wanted to tease out from him, because I think he does it so well, how he brings folks together, disparate groups, diverse entities within these communities that I just described, to really be able to not only coalesce, but accomplish some incredible things, which can only be done through partnership, communication, and collaboration. A lot of times we think that those are a given, those entities of, partnership, collaboration, and communication, but I'm here to tell you that they're difficult. And why it's important to be talking about that in the RF Factor is because that is what a leader needs to embody as it relates to creating those initiatives and oftentimes challenging the status quo. So that's why I brought Ron on. And hey, Ron, I want you to think of this here as our first discussion point to set us off here. I'd like to sort of bring us back to what I would consider in the wake of 9/11, because that's when I met you. And that's where you created such incredible magic around fusion centers and around information sharing, and to ensure that the information sharing that was not just between law enforcement, also through the federal entities. So I want to sort of cue that up, but certainly, hello.
Hey, so thanks. First of all, thanks, Ray and Pete, for having me. It's a great honor, and I appreciate being here. Yeah, so it was interesting. I mean, as you had said, I spent the majority of the first 2/3 of my career in narcotic enforcement, going through the ranks in the California Department of Justice at the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. And during that time, I had was a founding member and served 16 years as the president of the National Narcotic Officers Associations Coalition. And I had served as the president of the California Narcotic Officers Association. And that kind of put me in the mix a lot in Washington and on drug policies. But as part of that, I was asked to be part of to build out some intelligence policy in what at the time was called the General Counter Drug Intelligence Plan. Mm-hmm. It was a White House ONDCP, White House Drug Czars plan. And that was kind of my first foray into intelligence. I mean, I had been a consumer of intelligence, but hadn't really thought about it. And it was a great collaborative process. Leaders from all over law enforcement, federal, state, and local, both sworn and analysts and researchers. And not long after that process, and I met that's where I met real legends in our business, Russ Porter, Bart Johnson, some others that were involved in that. But not long after that process, 9/11 happened. And I can remember being in early discussions at the IACP, at the International Association of Chiefs of Police, where we were, we always thought, I think, that Homeland Security in the investigation of terrorism, that was a job for the FBI or a job for the intelligence community or a job for DOD. It happened overseas. It didn't happen here. But there was a sea change, as we watched firefighters, police officers, paramedics run into the Twin Towers, respond to Shanksville, respond into the Pentagon. And so that led to the creation of a lot of effort, local, state, federal effort, about how do we harness the power of more than 800,000 police officers, more than 1 million full-time and volunteer firefighters, that whole cadre of people that were part of this, community effort to keep our community safe. Because at the end of the day, terrorism is a crime, and on top of being an international crime, it's a state crime, it's a local crime, and so that's kind of how I got thrown in to the mix on
that. I'm just wondering how old you were when you started. 10 years old or what?
It was interesting. I mean, I started my career right when I was 21 and worked patrol like everybody, most people, but went into narcotics pretty early and kind of stayed there and went to the state investigative agency from a local police department. But I was still at the state and the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. I had not yet gone to the Fusion Center when all this began to happen. And so they selected leaders from each of the different associations. The National Narcotic Officers Coalition was one selected. And I was thrown into the mix with some incredibly smart people that understood criminal intelligence and homeland security issues much more than I did. But I think the one leg up I had, and Ray talked about this a little bit, is I came from an agency where we managed lots of multi-jurisdictional task forces, and where we didn't have a baked-in constituency. People had to want to work with us. We had to want to foster, collaboration and a cooperative, work environment. And so in the years that passed after 9/11, that committee work I did, the policy work that we were involved in, it was those lessons learned early on. And Pete, I think you probably learned that at ATF as well. Nobody has to have ATF involved. They have to want to have ATF involved. And it was the same for my agency.
Right. And so in managing all these disparate organizations that you mentioned, it's a bit like herding cats. I mean, what are some of the lessons that you learned to manage that in a sustainable way?
there was no roadmap for me, but it was like all of us, we kind of learn what works as it goes along. But I realized fairly early on, everybody's a stakeholder in this process. When you're especially in these committees where you're developing, and we were chartered federal advisory committees under the FACA Act. We were publishing actual guidance under the DOJ and later under the DHS seal. And I later did a similar job for the Director of National Intelligence. So you had to be respectful of people's opinions.
Right.
You had to be collaborative. You had to foster that working environment. But at the end of the day, somebody had to try to drive decisions. You couldn't get stuck never coming out with a product, never coming out with a policy, never adopting a decision. And so, I always wanted to be respectful of my partners, but at the end of the day, I wasn't afraid to make a decision, and I wasn't afraid to begin to move the discussion towards actual products and actionable policy.
Very important. Very important.
Hey, Ron, but nobody taught you that. And when I've seen you from the day I first met you, and I've had this opportunity to travel with you around the country, it seems like there's no one that you don't know. You have an incredible network. Something tells me that you've paid a lot of attention to that network. And I know you're the type of guy that if I call you on the phone, even if I haven't talked to you, you're either going to pick up or you're going to send me a text and say, I'll get back to you. And you don't forget. So there's something that tells me that you really value networks. You value relationships. You value people. I know that's not intrinsic. What was that sort of moment that it's somewhere in your past that you said, hey, this is all about people, and these people, I need to continue I need to have relationships with them into the future? Was there something that sort of signaled that for you early on?
It's funny. I went to a criminal intelligence school sponsored by the California Department of Justice. This is back when I was still a local narcotic agent, and it was taught by this guy from Orange County, California Sheriff's Office, and actually from the DA's office, and he was the chief investigator. And he says, "Hey, look, the most important thing at this class is not what I'm going to teach you. It's pass out cards, take in cards, and stay in touch with each other, because the network you build will be the most valuable tool that you've ever had." And that resonated with me, and I began to do that. And then as I went into kind of multi-jurisdictional task forcing, I realized that it was the reputation you build that makes people want to bring their cases to you, that makes them want to share their personnel or their resources. In those days, we were underfunded. We were pooling buy money together and vehicles and resources and personnel. And so you're right, Ray. I mean, even when I was managing big, like major squads where we weren't working smaller cases, the men and women that worked for me knew that my rule was, if anybody called, we were going to jump in and help them anytime. Didn't matter, big case, small case, because that would pay dividends. And a great example was I had some guys from the NYPD call me when I was a special agent in charge at the state. And they said, "Hey, we got your name from somebody. We're working a homicide in Queens, and we need some help, but I'm sure you won't help us, but our boss told us to call." And I said, "Yeah, I'm happy to help. What do you need?" And they said, "Well," and so they lined it out. And I said, "First thing we'll do, we'll put up some surveillance cameras. We'll do a trash run. We'll do some surveillance. If that pans out, we'll go up on some pen registers." I outlined this, and they go, "You're kidding me. You're really going to do that?" I said, "Sure. But, wouldn't you do it if I called you?" And he goes, "Nope." But by the end of it, they said, "Hey, we will never operate the way we used to again." We learned how to cooperate, and the end result was we took off these very violent murderers that had committed this horrific murder in Queens, that were hiding out in California. And, people appreciate that. They appreciate the cooperation. They appreciate, and you do this very well, Ray, calling when you don't need something too. Just pick up the phone, call, stop to have a beer or a coffee with somebody at a conference or a meeting. Make sure, because that's the most valuable thing I've ever had was not cars or airplanes or money. It was to use an old term, it was my Rolodex.
And this whole environment of criminal intelligence, I think what we're talking about is cross-jurisdictional teamwork, and what I think we're talking about here is not only cross-jurisdictional in terms of one agency to another, but even sometimes cross-jurisdictional within your own organization, where there's stovepipes exist and people are in their little pigeonholes. But at the end of the day, nobody has all the skills that are needed. Nobody has all the resources. So this idea of leveraging each other's knowledge and skills, I think, bear the label of cross-jurisdictional teamwork.
No, you're absolutely right. And Ray, you'll remember this when you were kind of first exposed to the Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council and the work we were doing. What had always happened before was the federal government had said, okay, here's the way we're going to do it. Here's the policies, here's how we're going to do it. But when we were able to get the federal government to create this FACA and to let us begin to write things like the National Criminal Intelligence Sharing Plan and the Fusion Center guidelines and that whole body of work that came with that, we pushed back and we said, the men and women that need to do this are in the 18,000 police agencies around the country. And it doesn't work for you to just dictate down. We have to collaboratively have bilateral discussions and agree on strategies. And so, as collaborative as I wanted to be, when I chairpersons before me that were excellent, Ken Boucher, Bart Johnson, Russ Porter, we all, and myself when I took over, we pushed back. Sometimes didn't make us always popular with our federal partners, but we came out with great work, and we finally began to get great respect from our federal partners. And I remember one of the great honors of my career was being asked to co-present with FBI Director Bob Mueller on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 at the IACP, because we had come up with this a collaborative strategy that really worked. But it wasn't me, or it wasn't Bart, or it wasn't Russ, or it wasn't you. It was the sum of all those parts.
And Ron, what I would tell you, being at the line level during that time, everyone then had skin in the game, but you created that opportunity for folks to all get involved and be a part of something much bigger. So it wasn't like someone was saying, we're going to do this up here and we just want you to say yes to it. What you did, no, we're all going to do this. We're all going to have skin in the game.
Everybody wants to see themselves in the operation. They want to see themselves in the outcome, or else why are they there?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, there were uncomfortable times where we pushed back pretty hard. There were behind closed doors arguments with some of our federal partners and some of the big agency partners as well. But at the end of the day, the success that we collectively achieved was achieved by a spirit of cooperativeness and collaboration, but also by having the courage to push back and say, no, you're not going to dictate that policy down to us. We collectively will come up with a policy that we can, or a practice that we can all use. And out of that came what is now the national network of fusion centers, 80 of them. The collaborative effort between the fusion centers, the HIDTA ISCs, the regional information sharing systems, the Major City Chiefs Association, Intel commanders, National Governors Association, Homeland Security advisors, all of that came out of the work. I just happened to be lucky enough to be there from the beginning, the first meeting, and lucky enough to chair that effort and honored to chair that effort. But it was really a team of just unbelievably talented men and women across the board, sworn, non-sworn, federal, state, local, tribal, territorial.
When my definition of collaboration, and it's one of my most favorite words, is you're collaborating when everybody's thinking and acting together. And unless everybody's thinking and acting together, you're not collaborating. You might be cooperating, but it's something much, much less and not as efficient nor effective.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And, the other thing that, and you both know this already, you've got to operate with integrity. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to put the time in to study, to understand. You don't have to be the expert on every issue, because you're going to hopefully have experts at the table with you. But you've got to understand it. You can't wing it. You've got to put in the work, and you have to do it with integrity. People have to trust you and want to buy in to the effort.
Competency is a big part of developing the trust, right?
It's absolutely a big part. And keeping your word, and speaking the truth even when it's uncomfortable, and being willing to reverse course. I mean, there were times where I felt strongly we were going in the right direction, and people pushed back, and it's being able to set your ego aside and listen to other smart people in the room, because just because you're the chair or the leader or the SAC or the chief doesn't mean that you have all the answers.
And I think one of the key words you just said is listen. Everybody wants to at least know that their ideas were listened to and considered, even if they're not always selected as the path forward.
Yeah, that's right, Pete. I mean, in my day job, when I was a SAC or an assistant chief or a director at the NCRIC and the HIDTA, I used to tell my team from the brand, even interns, I said, hey, anybody can come in here behind closed doors, tell me that I'm making a mistake, yell at me. I don't care. I don't have thin skin. But there is, there are certain rules in leadership and the way we organize, way we work in law enforcement. And so I said, hey, we could hash this out here and you will never hurt my feelings and I'll never be angry at you. But when we walk out the door, there can only be one decision maker. That's me. I can delegate authority, but I can't delegate responsibility. So at the end of the day, I'm going to take all your input, but I'm going to make the decision. I'll stand by it, good, bad, or indifferent. And we're going to walk out in lockstep.
And that's what a leader does, right?
Hey, Ron, one thing I noticed about you, well, one of many things I've noticed about you, is you're a phenomenal speaker, but you've never been afraid. And what brings this up is you both sort of touched on ego. You've never been afraid to let anyone else be any member of your team, regardless of where they were on the food chain or the hierarchy. You never had a problem with them being in the lead. And that, to me, that speaks volumes to not only you as a leader, but your ability to sort of mentor people along to let them be out in front as well. And I know for a lot of people that's difficult, right? Nobody wants to share the spotlight. You've never had a problem doing that. Now, at first glance, when I saw you do this, I said, maybe he's not the best speaker. So he puts other people out there. Was I wrong? Because you can speak, you can hold a room, but at the same time, you have no problem putting others out front. Can you sort of tease that out a little?
We've all got egos, and so I like to be the center of attention, just like anybody. But you're right, Ray. I mean, public speaking comes fairly easy to me, but as a leader, you're not doing your job if you are not A, recognizing talent on your team, and B, developing that talent. And part of developing is to let people run with their ideas, to let them get credit for that, to let them present. You reach a certain rank and you realize that, or a position in your organization, you realize you don't need that exposure, but the men and women that you're mentoring under you might. and they also might need the experience.
That's right.
And so that's something that I find that they tell you in management school. Part of your job is to mentor your people, get them ready. Every leader knows that part of their job is succession planning in the organization, but oftentimes it doesn't work. Oftentimes people, their ego gets in the way, and they don't build that succession planning, and they don't support their subordinates, growing because their ego gets in the way. And it's hard. I mean, it's hard for me sometimes. I don't want to act like I have been the best leader in the world always, but I try. I mean, I think about it. You have to kind of consciously think about those issues all the time, I think.
We've been talking a lot right now about the teamwork, the people, and that's the most important thing. But in reading your resume and seeing how you put actual intelligence processes in place and tactics, maybe you could speak a minute to that. I mean, how did you develop these? They weren't growing on a tree. Did you learn from others? But eventually, the fusion centers developed a process to follow. And maybe you could talk a second about that.
Sure. So, I didn't. I mean, when I first started in that process, I had been exposed somewhat in the GSIP development process, but unlike Russ Porter or Bart Johnson, who had worked in intelligence assignments in their career, I hadn't. And so I'd been a consumer of intelligence, working large, cartel and organized crime drug cases, but I came to it new. So I just tried to study the best I could, but mostly I relied on really smart people. We were all working in a team effort together. I mean, I learned so much from, as I said, from Bart and from Russ and from Tom O'Reilly and Jim McDermott and so many others that were just Mike Senna, that were just incredible thought leaders in this process. And all I tried to do was be the facilitator, the convener, try to bring all of that together in meaningful product and policies. The one thing that is important, I think, for any leader, though, like I said, is, know your stuff, do it with integrity, but also have courage. And in law enforcement, we think of courage as, going through the door or facing an armed suspect or a dangerous suspect. But it's also, career and political courage. You have to be willing to take risks, to make decisions, take risks, stand by those decisions, even if you think that if you get it wrong or it's perceived to be wrong, it might damage your career. Somebody has to draw a line in the sand and make those decisions.
So there's no analysis paralysis there, where people don't have the courage to take a chance, to utilize the information that in front of them. Some people just want all the answers. They want it all done, no questions asked, but we never get all the answers. Sometimes we have to move forward on just the information we have. I think that's what you're saying.
Yep. And it's interesting. I had a guy that was a mentor of mine when I was a young narcotic agent, a young supervisor. And I would get pretty wound up, try to dot every I, cross every T. And he says, "Hey, Brooksy, these are dope cases. We're building Chevys, not Cadillacs."
As long as the engine starts and the wheels roll, right?
So, I think while we always want the very best product we can get, and we want to have great pride in the products that we develop, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good.
And that's an extremely important point. A lot of people get wrapped around the axle in that, and nothing ever moves forward. They strive for perfection. 90% is good. We could always come back and fine tune it later.
Yeah.
Hey, Ron, we're big fans of Jack Maple from NYPD. We just actually were talking with Tommy Joyce about him yesterday, some interesting stories. But the reason I bring him up is CompStat and the 4 elements of CompStat. Both Pete and I believe that relentless follow-up is one of the most important elements of that sort of CompStat accountability process, but at the same time, it's probably one of the most difficult because it requires you to look in the rearview mirror. And you've been involved in, and just by looking at your background and me knowing you, you're involved in multiple things that occur at the same time, which makes it difficult to look in a rearview mirror. So, what does relentless follow-up mean to you as a leader? But maybe better said, if you were to give advice to someone, an up-and-comer that wanted to be a leader, a commander, what should relentless follow-up mean to them?
I think, I never worked in a patrol organization after CompStat was developed, but I certainly read a lot about it. I had the honor to meet Jack Maple. I've talked to folks like Anthony Ambrose and Bill Bratton about it. But relentless follow-up to me is, making sure to look at your successes and your failures, to build on those successes, to, the things that worked right, make sure that you try to continue those practices and those efforts. The things that worked wrong, be honest enough with yourself and your team to try to make those corrections. Don't be ruthless about it. Make those opportunities to learn and to grow. For a short while in my organization, I was on an inspection team, and some of the inspection teams could be pretty tough on people. And my idea of inspection was, I wasn't there to get you and to embarrass you and to hurt your career. My idea was to help you learn where you made mistakes before something really unraveled that could hurt your career or hurt the career of the men and women that worked for you, or God forbid, get somebody hurt or killed.
So we've been talking now. We've talked about the people. We've talked a little bit about the processes right now, and relentless follow-up. Where do you see? How did you see technology helping in the work that you were able to do and the organizations you were able to put together and the mission you were trying to accomplish?
Technology has certainly helped us. I mean, we look at the technology today, just the databasing of license plate recognition, facial rec, our ability to do cross-case analysis with powerful analytic tools and to do very easy searches against criminal databases. Those were all things we didn't have before. When I started, we didn't even have copy machines, and we made, it was type to search for, and it was 5 copies with carbon paper, and if you made a mistake, you had white out, and it was a laborious process.
Or throw the typewriter in the waste paper basket.
Yep, exactly. But at the end of the day, as important as embracing technology and staying up on technology is critically important, nothing will ever substitute for human interactions, for networks, for being understanding, for mentoring, for listening, and for real teamwork. You could have the greatest tools in the world if you don't have a well-functioning team, and if you don't have competent leaders and competent journeymen, officers, agents, deputies, troopers. You could have all the technology in the world; it won't make a difference.
So, if I was to sum that up, and Ray's going to know I've just set you up. If I was to sum that up, would I be correct in saying that it takes a balance of people, processes, and technology to accomplish the mission today?
It does take a balance, and it isn't even evenly balanced. It is people first and foremost, process second, technology third. In my opinion, that
the technology helps people become more efficient and effective.
Absolutely.
Processes. It's a tool like a shovel or a rake would be to the Neanderthals, right?
I mean, I remember when we were supporting at the NCRIC, we were supporting the Oakland Police Department, tough city, a lot of crime. And when they had a robbery, a rape, a homicide, they had all their field interview cards in shoe boxes, and they would send Explorer cadets down to go search through those. And so I forward deployed analysts and some technology, and we automated that, and we got them in a searchable database. It was a big step for them, but at the end of the day, they still needed dedicated, hardworking investigators and patrol officers to make a difference in the community. We saw crime. We saw some great reductions in crime. The technology helped them, but the real heroes there were the men and women on the front line.
Absolutely.
Hey, Ron, I've been fortunate enough to have been invited to several dinners that you have sort of hosted over the years. And I say fortunate because it's just an incredible sight of people that are in this room. It's your network. It's really important people to this profession of law enforcement, homeland security, counterterrorism. I say important because each of those entities are huge contributors. And you've always found a way to get all these folks in one room and be a community and to sort of break bread. But that in itself is a tremendous feat. But what is really unique about that event is it starts off with you giving words, right? But more importantly, you making sure that we go around the room and everyone introduces themselves and maybe says a little bit of an anecdote, depending on the person. But tell me why you do that. I will tell you, at first when it happens, particularly for the newbies in a room, they get all nervous. But it's interesting. It does something, and I'll speak about what I feel it does after you speak to it. But why do you do it, and what's your intent?
I do it for two reasons, or three maybe. The first is it's fun, and you got to have a little fun in this job. But the biggest reason is, as we talked about in the very beginning, this network, building a network across, federal, state, and local, and our private sector partners as well, industry partners. Having that network, knowing each other, being able to pick up the phone, knowing each other socially. And so, as you know, Ray, at those dinners, I say a few words and I get everybody to go around the room and I say, look, I know you guys don't want to go around the room, but we're gonna. So everybody goes around the room, who they are, where they're from, maybe a little anecdote. This year coming up will be my 18th at IACP, but I've done a lot of smaller iterations of that dinner too. Done it at the Fusion Center conferences and others. And I always try to bring some young folks in to kind of mentor them. And I try to bring in a cross section, chiefs, sheriffs, state police superintendents from big and small and mid-sized agencies. Federal, we've had some very significant federal partners there as well. But I do it because it's good for our profession. And what's good for our profession is good for our country.
And thank you for that. And so my take on it, and I say my take, what it means to me is it helps create this community. It breaks down barriers. When people are able to get up and introduce themselves, where they're from, maybe a little anecdote, it helps build trust in the group. And it's so interesting because people they just want to sort of skip the dinner and just go right up and start talking and networking with people. And they wouldn't have been able to do that if people didn't really do an introduction, because that's what's happening there. So kudos that you started doing that and that you continue to do it. But what I think it does, it just builds trust among this community. And it's really neat. And particularly that every year you bring some newbies in a room, and it's neat watching that metamorphosis occur over that 2-hour period, and they become part of the community too. So really neat stuff.
It is fun. And this sounds crazy, but I agonize over the seating chart because I don't want anybody to sit with the people they're comfortable with. I want them to sit with new friends. And I want the person from NCIS to sit with the chief from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I want them to not even experience high level to high level or big city to big city. I want there to truly be a dialogue. And Ray, you've seen this at the dinners. The old hands know they get there the minute the door is open and they start networking.
That's
and between
right.
each course, they get up and they wander table to table,
Yes.
talking to each other. And after dinner, when dessert's being served, people are carrying their dessert around. They're sitting at each other's chairs.
Yep.
And we don't have any outside of me just kind of welcoming people and talking a little bit about our profession. There's no other speeches, no other plaques. There's no photographs taken. There's no name tags. I want people to feel just really comfortable that they can share experiences with the people in the room, share a business card, and be willing to call each other and help each other at the end of that.
Hey, Ron, I've got a question that we've asked every guest on the R Factor, and it stems from the treatise, The Prince by Machiavelli. And in that, Machiavelli posed the question, is it better for the prince to be loved or feared? So I'd ask you, is it better for a leader to be loved or feared?
That's a tough question, and it scares me, especially from a couple of Italian guys like you. You guys might be putting a hit out on me or something. No, you know what? I think it is. I don't know if it's better to be loved, but it's definitely not good to be feared. And you want to be somewhere in that love or at least respect category. You want people, you both know this, but some of the audience may not. There's two highest compliments I believe you could give anybody in our profession is A, they're a good cop. You don't need to say anything more about it. Mm-hmm. And the second biggest, the second highest compliment you could give is I would go through the door with you anytime. And so I think with leaders, you're not always going through the door with them. Maybe they're a chief or an assistant chief or a SAC or whatever. But you're going through that political door with them. They're making decisions. Those decisions impact your career, your working environment, how you're perceived in the community, how you're perceived by other agencies. And so I would always rather go with somebody I love or at least respect.
Ron Brooks, come on down. That's a great answer, sir.
I love it. Hey, Ron, you've been around the block, right? You've got plenty of time in this profession. You've hit all the bases as it relates to ranks. You've had some pretty important positions that are representing state and local with the federal government, with the intelligence community. You've heard a lot about leadership. You probably read a lot about leadership. What is one common myth that you'd like to debunk about leadership?
I think it's that you can learn leadership from a book or a class or a tape. Leadership is about being honest enough with yourself to take in and absorb what you know works well and try to avoid the things that you know don't work well. So I don't think, you can't just pay somebody and send them to school, even to a prestigious school like the Kennedy School or NPS or anything else. You can't just instantly make people leaders. They have to be willing to learn, to share experiences, to listen to their colleagues. We all know some of the best leaders is not the captain on a shift or a lieutenant on a shift, might not even be the sergeant. It is the person that emerges that everybody on that shift is willing to follow because they make great decisions. They do it with great integrity, and they're very well respected.
Hear, hear.
Pete, I have one last question, so I don't know if you have something that you want to add.
No, fire away, Ray.
Ron, how you paying it forward? You've been an incredible mentor to a lot of people, to include myself, but that's reactionary to you by the folks that you have led. What are you proactively doing to pay it forward for these newbie leaders down the road?
I just try to stay involved, Ray. I mean, I try to continue to be on committees that matter, even committees that I no longer serve on, that I'm allowed to come back kind of in an emeritus status. I try to go back and give the benefit without being overpowering. It's their committee now, but benefit of what I've learned. I try to continue, and I still meet with police officers, both virtually and in person, that want mentoring, that need mentoring, or maybe they're getting ready to retire and they're going out to the private sector and they want or need that kind of mentoring as well. I am always happy to serve wherever I'm asked. But I also just, as you know, I get people together socially. We talk, we share stories, and we always, I mean, the people that we all have in common, Ray, among us, our group of friends and stuff, they're always, all of them are solid mentors for our profession.
Right.
And I try to still do a little writing, and then the work we do in our firm, representing national law enforcement associations. I try to always remember to make decisions that are never best for business, but always best for our profession and for the practitioners.
Awesome. Well, how do people find that firm? Is you guys online?
Yeah, we're online. It's just www.bbm-dc. So boy Mary-davidcharles.com.
Outstanding. Ron, I can't. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, as you know, Ray, we have a newsletter that covers pretty much everything going on in Washington. If you go to the website and you're interested, if you're kind of a policy nerd like I am, and that stuff interests you, you can always click on subscribe to the newsletter. We're happy, you could share it with people. There's nothing proprietary, but I mean, my dad and my wife and my daughter and my son-in-law and myself, we're all police officers. More than 140 years of service total.
Incredible.
Wearing the badge for the 38 years, it's the greatest thing of my life, and always will be. People always said, hey, it was great when you get to retire. I miss the job every day still. If I wasn't an old fat dude, I'd go back tomorrow. And but luckily, through guys like you, I get to stay in the old neighborhood, and that feels good to me.
Wow.
You know, what you just said stimulated one more question. May I, Ray?
You certainly can.
Just one more.
With a hat like that, you certainly can.
You touched on policy. And what do you think the roles and responsibilities of our policymakers and legislators in the war against crime?
I think we have to look at what's worked and what hasn't worked. We certainly know that police officers and our profession doesn't get it right all the time. But I also believe that our profession is under attack based on myth and false narrative, and that there are more than 22,000 police officers on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. 19 of them are people that I worked with, including my partner. And I think they need to have the courage to stand up, not for what they think is politically correct or the political narrative of the day, stand up for what they know is right. When law enforcement gets it wrong, we need to pay. But when we get it right, our officers shouldn't have to suffer from a lack of support and leadership.
Well said.
The rule of law has to stand, or else criminals act with impunity. And then we're in big trouble.
And sadly, Pete, I'm afraid we're getting close.
Me too.
I'm afraid we're getting close. And I think, we look at the violent crime stats. I mean, if you look, 1992, the city of New York was almost 2,400 murders. And in 2018, it was under 400. Well, that happened due to a lot of great stuff, community outreach and interaction with communities at risk. But it also happened because a lot of hard work by men and women in law enforcement and by men and women in prosecution and in the court system. And when we decide that we're going to that we're not going to follow the rule of law and we're going to just follow the political barometer of the day, the country suffers, and we're seeing that now in dramatic spikes in violent crime across the nation, and it worries me.
We're with you, brother.
And the chilling effect on recruitment and retention. I mean, we've all seen that. I mean, when I applied for my job with the state, there were 4,000 applicants for 64 jobs, and you had to have 10 years 10 years law enforcement experience to even apply.
Wow.
It's not like that anymore.
No.
We're hurting every day.
That's right. It's getting scary.
In fact, that's a great topic for a podcast, Ray. Get somebody on that's really good on recruitment and retention.
You know what? You're not kidding. It's critical, and now more than ever.
And Pete, we were talking about Jack Maple. I just wanted to comment on your hat. I saw your hat, it reminded me of Jack.
his bowler derby there.
Yep.
And his spats. And I think I saw him with a cane one time too.
Yep. Different kind of a hat, but it was still cool.
Yes, sir.
It was a hat. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Ron, I can't thank you enough for being a guest on this cast. You're paying it forward just being here. So thank you.
It was a lot of fun and a great honor. And I appreciate Pete and Ray, both of you inviting me.
And, I've been around the block a bit myself, and I've never met anybody with experience at your level that you've had in the intelligence area. I'm just amazed and in awe, really.
No, thanks. It just comes from old age, Pete. You stick around long enough.
Well, like I said before, I think you started when you were 10 years old, really.
Ron, we'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Pete.
Bye, Ron.
Incredible, huh? Wow. I told you. Yeah, incredible.
I'm serious. I've never met anybody with a resume like this before.
Yeah, impressive. And a regular guy, and to break bread with him, and the war stories, how he's navigated things and what he's seen. It's really impressive.
I know we must have come across each other at the ICP. I mean, he looks very familiar.
Yeah. Well, Pete, thanks again for taking the time. This was a good cast as usual, and we'll get it out ASAP.
Yes, sir. Goodbye, everybody.
All right. Be safe. I love that brick wall too.